crunch is a great exercise for runners for two main reasons. And this comes down to the two different phases of the exercise. So the first half of the movement is you're curling your body up using your abdominals and your different stabilizers to slowly brace your core. The second half of the movement is the actual curl up part. And so when you're lifting yourself up, you're mostly using your hip flexors to do that. And so the first half and the second half, you're basically working abdominals and then flipping over to working hip flexors. Then the most running specific part of this motion is when you're actually going back down. You're eccentrically working on your hip flexors and then on your abdominals. And so when you think about running, the motion that you're doing when you go through a running stride is when you're powering forwards, you're using your hip flexors and your core to pull that leg forwards. So that's essentially kind of what you're doing in the first half of that crunching motion. And then the second half of that crunch, that eccentric, essentially lengthening out the muscle, is exactly what happens when you push off and your leg extends out behind you. And you need to be able to use your core and your hip flexors to slow that leg down and get it moving back in the opposite direction. So the crunch is great because it works on both aspects of this movement. While you're in the gym, you get to practice it, make sure you're activating everything properly, and then that'll translate nicely over to your running form outside. Let's take a look at how to do it. Setup for a crunch is really simple. All you need is a mat on the floor, and you just need to make sure that you have enough space that you're not going to be bumping into anything when you're fully stretched out at the end of your range of motion. To do a proper crunch, there's a few important things that you want to keep in mind. So first off, there's two phases to this exercise. So I like to think about it when I'm practicing my form, I like to think about it in those two separate phases. And then when it comes time to do it in the real world, you combine them together into one fluid, seamless motion. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna set yourself up on your mat and you're gonna ground your feet firmly on the ground, and then you're gonna lower yourself all the way down here. So head is gonna be on the ground, shoulders, low back, and butt are all on the ground. From there, hands are gonna go next to the side of your head just to kind of keep them out of the way. You really wanna focus on not holding onto your head for this exercise. If you do, there's always that instinct that you wanna pull yourself up with your hands, which puts a ton of force in your neck, and you really don't wanna do that. So I like to just hover my hands next to my ears, or you can even just touch lightly on the side of your head, but you don't wanna be pulling with your hands. So once you're in this position, we're gonna look at the first phase of what we do here. So phase number one is a little bit of a curl up. So you can see right here, my chest is extended, my rib cage is up, and everything is kind of relaxed through here. So the first phase of what I'm doing, I'm still looking straight up at the ceiling, but I'm lifting from my shoulders and activating kind of down here, all the different muscles on the way down. So from here, I'm lifting, and now everything is active. You can see how I've contracted with my ribs here. I've contracted through my core, but I haven't crunched my neck all the way up. We want to avoid doing that, whether it's pulling with our hands or just lifting with our neck. So I'm still looking straight up at the ceiling, and that's that first phase. You can just practice that if you want to. You're going through just that range of motion at the beginning of your movement. The second half of it, after you've done that crunch, you're lifting yourself the rest of the way up. And depending on how long your legs are, how long your upper body is, you might be able to move your legs nice and close and have enough leverage to do it, or you might need to move your legs a little bit farther out to have the leverage to do it. But your pivot point is gonna be your butt. You want to have your low back in contact with the ground as you're starting to come up. And then from here, I'm doing my first half, and then my second half is coming the rest of the way up. Then to lower back down, same thing. I'm lowering myself down and then just reversing that first half. So you kind of have a first half on the way up, then a second half, then a first half, and a second half. So to put it all together, you're doing your first part and then coming all the way up, and then you're coming all the way back down. So it's a nice, smooth, fluid motion when you put it together, but if you want to practice the form, I definitely recommend doing those two separate pieces and just practicing each of those until you get the hang of it. To increase the difficulty of the crunch, what you can do is you can take an extra weight and you can add that onto your chest. You're not gonna be able to put your hands next to your head here, but what you'll do is you'll put that weight right against your chest, and then you can go through that same range of motion. If your low back or your neck bug you when you're doing this exercise, you can substitute in a hanging leg raise and do the same thing instead. And so essentially you're not working on that first phase where you're doing the crunch, you're just working on the second phase when you're doing the hip flexor exercise. As an alternative to the crunch, the other thing you can substitute in is a bicycle. So with a bicycle, it's a similar hip flexor movement where you're on your butt, you can balance your hands on the ground, and you're gonna do your bicycle legs out front. So it's a little bit different because you're doing one leg at a time as you go through that range of motion. However, you're still working on your hip flexor stability.